Ain't nobody fucking with my click, 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 click. Ain't nobody fresher than my mug, click, 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 click. As I look around, they don't do it like my click, 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 click. And all these bad men, they wonder.
Britain, Secretary of State William Seward declared
In a couple of weeks, he has taken the position of General-in-Chief from Winfield Scott.
Looking sharp.
Thanks.
Hello, San Diego. This is Channel 5 News Team reporting from you live from TJ Mad Dog Cavaney's basement.
Tonight we explore the year 1861. 1861 was a big year. Lincoln became our president and our nation was at war.
This year started with the succession of the southern states, first with South Carolina. Let's go to our political expert to hear more. I'm here with political expert TJ Mad Dog Cavaney, and he'll be discussing the political news in 1861.
The secession of the South started in January of 1861 when South Carolina, displeased with the election of Abraham Lincoln, called a state convention and voted to remove the state from the Union. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas soon followed South Carolina. In February, these states met in Montgomery, Alabama. There, they formed a government and created the Confederate Constitution, which is similar to the United States Constitution but placed a greater stress on the autonomy of each state. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina left the Union and joined the Confederacy in April. In June, West Virginia was formed as a new state and member of the Union because its residents did not wish to secede with the rest of the state.
Hey, now back to the voice in the station.
Thanks, boys.
Another important event this year was the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln on March 4th.
Here's TJ Mad Dog Cavaney to enlighten you San Diegans about this event.
Lincoln's inaugural address was the first major example of his extraordinary effort to keep the North and South together as one. The North was thrilled with Lincoln's election as president. The South saw it as a death sentence for their culture and economy. In his address, he declared that he had no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery.
Here's an inspiring clip shot by a flip phone at Lincoln's inaugural address.
We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over the broad land will yet swell the course of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be by better angels of our nature.
In late April of 1861, a very important vote took place. Chaos erupted on the streets of Maryland, and President Lincoln dealt with it in a controversial way.
Last April, the Maryland House of Delegates met to discuss and vote on secession from the Union. Maryland was a very important state for both the North and the South because of how close it was to Washington, D.C. Southern demonstrators streamed into Maryland, causing public chaos and blocking soldiers on their way to Washington. Lincoln responded to this by declaring martial law and suspending the writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a basic right guaranteed to us by our Constitution. It means that a person accused has a basic right to have a fair trial before a judge, where his or her detainment and/or imprisonment is determined to be legal or illegal.
I'm Kevin Hale, and this is a man who's on the streets of Maryland during the riots. What's your name, sir?
Adam Vortman.
And where are you from?
I'm from Connecticut, Liberals of America.
What was going on during the time?
Oh, it was rowdy. People in the streets, it was dank.
What were they doing? Were they causing trouble or what?
Yeah, graffiti everywhere, going to the bathroom on the streets.
Were you partaking in any of this?
Yes, ma'am.
What are you drinking tonight?
Moonshine.
Where'd you get it?
Liberals of America.
That was Kevin with Adam Vortman, a prominent member of the Liberals of America institution. The Confiscation Act was another political event in 1861 that some say violated our constitutional rights. Let's go back to TJ to hear more.
What's up? This is Adam Vortman here on the streets. I'm with TJ Cavaney, Panduit guy. So, TJ, tell me about this act.
Well, the Confiscation Act of 1861 was an act of the United States Congress passed on August 6th. The act permitted the confiscation of any property, including slaves, being used to support the Confederate independence effort.
Yeah. So, what did President Lincoln think of this act?
Well, the act passed overwhelmingly in Congress, but Lincoln was reluctant to sign it for two reasons. The first was that he worried the bill would have no practical effect and might be seen as a desperate move because of recent Confederate victories. The second was that he was afraid the bill might be struck down as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and this would have set a precedent making future attempts at emancipation difficult.
That was our intern field reporter from the Liberals of America Institution, Adam Vortman, talking to TJ about the Confiscation Act. Later on this year, in November, the Trent incident almost started another war with Great Britain. Here's our boy, Kevin, talking to TJ about this act.
Here are your waters, fellas.
Your tip will come later, Adam.
Vortman out.
I'm here with our political analyst, TJ Mad Dog Caveney.
Oh, yeah.
So, Mad Dog, tell us about the basics of the Trent incident.
Well, on November 8th, a United States ship called the San Jacinto, commanded by Captain Charles Wilkes, encountered a British ship called Trent. Great Britain was neutral in the conflict between the North and the South, but was carrying two Confederate commissioners named James Murray Mason and John Siddall. These commissioners were seeking the support of England and France for the cause of the Confederacy.
What were the consequences of all this?
Well, this unauthorized seizure caused great protests and demands for war throughout Britain. The British government demanded an apology from the United States, as well as the release of Mason and Siddall. In order to avoid war with Great Britain, Secretary of State William Seward declared that this incident violated America's policy of freedom of the seas. The Confederate commissioners were released shortly after.
Here's the big mort on the action, Parbs, with some information on the Battle of Fort Sumter.
Thank you for having me, Jake Loons. I was recently given the opportunity to see the Battle of Fort Sumter, which took place on April 12th, which was quite a bit ago. It was the first real battle really kick-started the Civil War, you know. Brigadier General Beauregard, who was in command of the Confederate Army in Charleston, South Carolina, demanded that the Union forces surrender the fort, but the commander and Anderson would not have any piece of that. Shortly after this dispute, 2 days later to be exact, the Confederates opened fire and easily took control of it, with Major Anderson's Union troops having to surrender the next day. In the end, though, there were no casualties, but it was a starting point for the battles that would shortly follow.
Thanks for the detailed explanation, Mr. Parbs. Now back to Mr. Parbs with some more of what he does best. His ability to analyze battles better than anyone else in the business. Now analyzing the Battle of Bull Run, here he is.
Oh, well, thanks, boys. You know, I just do it for the fans. But back what I do best, I guess. This battle, the Battle of Bull Run, that is, started on July 16th, and started when the Union Army, which was commanded by Brigadier General Irvin McDowell, came from Washington and were sent on to win the first major land battle between the two sides. At first, the Union put in some damage when attacking the Confederates by flanking on the left, but soon after, though, the Confederates would gain reinforcements and be able to break the right flank of the Union and take many other men. They would rapidly deteriorate the Union forces and take the victory in this battle. The importance of this battle, though, was not only that it was the first major land battle, but it wasn't a battle that led to the realization, especially Lincoln's, that this war wasn't going to be a quick set of a few battles, and that it had to be a longer, much more realistic type of war. In the end, though, there were a total of 2,950 Union casualties and 1,750 Confederate. Along with that, Lincoln would end up replacing McDowell with George McClellan to command the Union Army. Well, thanks, Parbs. He truly does a great job, doesn't he?
Indeed. Now it's time for an interview with the man, Craig Giles, who seems to know quite a bit about the Anaconda Plan, whatever the fifalist that is.
Thanks for having me on the show, you mercs.
It's our pleasure. So what was this Anaconda Plan all about?
Well, it was basically a plan that was devised by the Union to slow down the Confederates' cash flow. It put up a blockade to all saltwater ports in the South and to stop trade on the Mississippi River in order to prevent the trade of cotton primarily. It was devised in about April earlier this year, that is, and was thought up by a man named Winfield Scott, who was also a general.
Gee whiz, that's crazy. Makes sense, though, if they wanted to try and prevent the South's #1 export, which required all that slave labor. I have another question, though. That is, if you have time.
Of course, old sport.
Well, I'm just trying to process this whole thing in my noggin, Just the plan. Why is it named after a snake? It's not clicking for me, boys.
I get this one all the time. It's really simple, though, if you think about it, at least I think. But it basically was devised to strangle the Confederacy, just as an anaconda snake strangles or constricts its prey.
Well, that's very interesting. Thanks, though, Craig. It makes perfect sense now. Well, that's all I think there is to talk about tonight, so let's hit it back to the boys in the station. Well, we're back after the interview with Craig Giles on the Anaconda Plan, but now let's move on to the exploration of military technology, especially the weaponry, and the battle tactics used in the beginning of this war. Here he is, the legendary John Smith.
Well, thanks off for having me on the broadcast, gentlemen. Anyways, during this year we have seen quite the display of weapons used, from rifles to revolvers, such as the Springfield musket and the Colt 1861 Navy. It has truly been a sight. Also, we were seeing the use of many new swords, such as the Mameluke sword, the 1860 saber, the artillery sword, and many others that were very similar to these.
Could you cut a steak with it?
You could most definitely cut a snake.
Cut a snake?
And a steak.
And a steak and an anaconda snake?
You could definitely cut an anaconda snake if you really are about that
wish.
life. Yeah, if you're about that life, suit yourself.
Continue.
Thank you. But we also saw the use of the Gatling gun, which was this automatic weapon firing contraption thing. It truly was revolutionary.
Sounds hot.
Yeah, I mean, really got some people going. But other than that, there were use of a few grenades, and that was pretty much it for the technology during this time period. And there was also a few battle strategies used, such as flanking, which was starting to be used in this time period, as well as a bunch of just line formation, bang bang,
Bang,
and
bang.
yeah, just the bang bang, and that's really about it. And thanks again for having me on the show, gentlemen, and see you next year, boys.
I appreciate having you on the show, and he's gone, as you can see.
Thanks, Parbs. Now Kevin will introduce Forbes' top sexiest man of the year.
Our next guest is Patio Furniture. He's our biographical critic, and he's going to give you a list of the most influential people of the year 1861.
All right, Patty, I'd just like to say congratulations on your 10th year being Forbes' sexiest man.
Thank you.
And then let's get right to it. Apart from being Abraham Lincoln, who is obviously the man with the most power in the country, tell us all the first man on your list.
At number 3 on my list, I have the Southerner, General Robert E. Lee. General Lee is a native of Virginia. He is a man who is connected with the roots of the United States. He is the third son of the Revolutionary War hero Henry Lee, and his wife is connected to the ancestry of President George Washington. Lee attended West Point Military Academy and graduated as one of the best in his class. He's a veteran of the Mexican-American War. Several years ago, Lee was tasked with putting down the uprising led by the late John Brown at Harper's Ferry. Last year, he was given the rank of colonel of the 1st U.S. Cavalry. After the war broke out earlier this year, President Jefferson Davis named Lee as the Lieutenant General of the Confederate forces. During the early battles of the war, Lee struggled to find success, and some members of the South have started to doubt his ability to lead. Despite the lack of victories, Jefferson Davis recently appointed Lee to be personal military advisor. Davis cited Lee's status as a brilliant tactician to be the cause for the promotion.
Well, that was some insightful news, Patty, especially John Brown. What a guy. What a guy. Patty, why did Roberto choose to join the ranks of the Confederacy, and how do those underneath him feel about his leadership role?
Well, Ryan, the way Lee came to power is actually quite interesting. General Lee does not actually support slavery or the idea of secession. President Lincoln actually extended an offer to Lee in which he asked for him to be the leader of the Union forces. Obviously, we know that Lee turned him down and joined the South. In a letter he wrote to General Winfield Scott back in April, he said, "I shall carry with me to the grave the most grateful recollections of your kind consideration, and your name and fame will always be dear to me. Save for defense of my native state, I never desire again to draw my sword." In this statement, he cites his loyalty to his home state as the reason he joined the Confederacy. As a leader, Lee is extremely loyal to his troops, although he is very regimented. Most of his soldiers, even members of the Union, have a great respect for General Lee.
Yeah, I heard Roberto had a good time. It's pretty rowdy being a Confederate soldier, eh?
Yeah, I already had a good time. Some parties. Confederate parties.
So, Patty, who takes home the deuce on your list?
Number 2 on my list will take home a $5 gift certificate, courtesy of the Cracker Barrel.
Yes!
And that is General from the North, George McClellan. He is a native of Philadelphia, and just like Lee, he is a West Point alum as well as a Mexican-American War veteran. He's a brilliant general who has studied in Europe, and he even invented a new saddle for the cavalry. Before the war started, he was president of the Ohio-Mississippi Railroad. When war broke out this year, he was appointed to Major General in command of the Department of Ohio. In the early stage of the war, he forced Confederate troops out of western Virginia. After the North's recent defeat at the Battle of Bull Run, Lincoln ordered McClellan to take charge of a wider variety of military operations. In the last couple of weeks, he has taken the position of General-in-Chief from Winfield Scott.
How has McClellan kept up his success throughout the war so far?
Well, General McClellan is very methodic in his approach to battle. He prepares his troops extremely well. Some might argue he spends too much time preparing. He doesn't take many risks. He only makes a move if everything is set up perfectly.
I've heard rumors about General McClellan's attitude toward his superiors. What can you tell me about his relationships with his colleagues?
Well, McClellan has been known to have a massive ego. On one occasion, in November, President Lincoln went to pay him a visit at his home. McClellan was informed that he was there, and he didn't care. He didn't even go down to talk to him. He snubbed the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the country. In a letter that he wrote to his wife, the general can be quoted saying that Lincoln was nothing more than a well-meaning baboon, and that William Seward was an incompetent little puppy.
So, Patty, who was your most influential person of the year 1861?
That would be the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Before becoming the leader of the South, Davis was a Southern politician from Mississippi. He also went to West Point and fought in both the Mexican-American War and the Black Hawk Indian War. He owns a 1,000-acre plantation named Breerfield, and he believes that the Bible says the blacks are inferior and that slavery is mutually beneficial. His political ideas were formed on his plantation reading books about history and politics. He is no stranger to being in a position of power. He has been a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and twice been a U.S. Senator. In 1853, he was appointed to President Franklin Pierce's Secretary of War. He was elected by the Confederate States in January of this year to be the President of the Confederacy. He reluctantly took office, but he wanted to be on the battlefield. He was inaugurated in February, and in his inaugural address, he spoke as if the nation was two separate countries that must work together and find peace. It is hard for Davis to lead from the back lines. He isn't able to manage the details of battle, which is what he has always been so good at.
Well, Patty, is there anyone else you'd like to talk about?
Well, yes, there is one more. Although he's not included in my list, I would like to tell you about Elmer Ellsworth.
Who's that?
Well, Ellsworth moved to Chicago from New York as a teenager to study law. While in Chicago, he commanded a group known as the U.S. Zouave Cadets. They wore exotic uniforms, but were efficient soldiers. Ellsworth's group was assigned to guard the governor of Illinois. The company moved to Springfield to accomplish this. In Springfield, Ellsworth joined Lincoln's presidential campaign last year, in 1860. When Lincoln won the election, Ellsworth accompanied Lincoln to Washington, and they became close friends. Earlier this year, when the Confederates were occupying Alexandria, Virginia, they raised a Confederate flag. After the fighting was over, Ellsworth saw the flag was still flying, so he left to go lower the flag. He went up the stairs to the roof, where he proceeded to take the flag off. While he descended from the roof, an innkeeper named James Jackson shot him. His death was, and still is, felt throughout the country. Harper's Weekly newspaper ran stories detailing the events. Ellsworth's death was an extremely personal loss for Lincoln, and it was only one of the first casualties of the war. When Lincoln heard of the news, he shouted, my boy, was it necessary for this sacrifice should it be made?" This quote shows Lincoln how devastated he was by the loss of his close friend so soon in the war. I ask all of you watching to remember Elmer Ellsworth.
We will now take a moment of silence.
All right, here we go. Thanks, Patio Furniture, for that influential people, whatever you call it. All right. Now here we go to one of the most rowdiest and ratchiest guys around town. They know him as Kevin the Hurt Hale.
Thank you for the introduction, Ryan. But now it's time to talk about some economic issues. The Union States made 97% of all firearms during the Civil War, and they had 96% of the railroad equipment necessary to move their products. This helped the North have a huge economic advantage over the South due to their ability to better equip their soldiers and move crucial supplies to the war front. The Confederacy produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, and sugar, but however, they had a tough time moving their goods and selling their products due to the Anaconda Plan imposed by President Lincoln.
Wow, those are some cray statistics.
Yes, sir, brethren. I got some more coming in hot. The Union at the time had 22 million people, while the Confederacy had 9 million, but 4 million of those 9 million were enslaved. This allowed the North to have a greater industry and greater military force. Finalmente, in 1861, Lincoln imposes the first federal income tax by signing the Revenue Act, wanting cash for which to pursue the Civil War. Lincoln and Congress agreed to impose a 3% tax on annual incomes over $800. However, the South had a difficult time raising revenue for the war effort, enabling the North to control the war.
Well, pretty much speaks for itself.
That was the year 1861 in review. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Next Friday, I've been up straight for 9 days. I need a spa day. Yup. She tryna give me that Wu-Tang. I might let my crew bang. My crew deep in it Wu-Tang. I'm rolling with, you know what I'm saying? Girl, you know my crew name. You know 2 Chainz. I'm pulling up in that Bruce Wayne, but I'm the feeling, man. They kneeling when I'm walking in the building. Freaky women I be feeling. From the bank accounts I'm feeling. What a feeling. Nah, man, ain't gotta be a young player from the D that's killing everything that he see. Put him up.
Vorman out.